A lonely woman draws the attention of a bloodthirsty creature who's willing to bring the end of days to be with her. In tears, Ellen prays to any spirit to give her company. A ghostly voice responds, thanking her for awakening him from eternal darkness. She follows the voice towards the window, only to be lifted by a shadowy figure. Ellen later walks into the courtyard and offers herself to the creature, but a beast appears and chokes her. She starts seizing, though the creature vanishes. Years later, Ellen's new husband Thomas prepares to leave early for work. Not wanting him to go, she pulls him to bed, but he insists that he's late, so he kisses her goodbye. After he leaves, Ellen worries that her husband will be sent away. Thomas soon meets Herr Knock, who recently hired him upon learning of his marriage. Knock assigns him to meet with Count Orlok, who's buying the Grunewald Manor despite the property being in ruins. However, he's too old to travel, so Thomas will travel to Transylvania to finalize the paperwork with him. Knock promises that if he secures this deal, he'll also secure his job. With no choice, Thomas tells his wife that he'll be away for 6 weeks. Ellen cries, then insists on telling him her dream. The man reminds her that her doctor advised her not to dwell on her childhood memories, but the woman stresses that she dreamed about their wedding. However, in her dream, death was waiting for her at the altar, not Thomas. Furthermore, all the guests were dead. Despite this, Ellen was happy in the dream, and now she thinks that this is an omen. Assuming that she's worried about their future, Thomas assures her that once he completes the deal, he'll make enough money to buy a house. With that, he takes Ellen to the house of his friend, Friedrich Harding, who's expecting his third child with his wife, Anna. As they drink, Friedrich wonders when Thomas will start a family, and he explains that he will once they're financially stable. With this in mind, Thomas asks Friedrich to look after his wife while he's away. Later, while everyone sleeps, Ellen places some of her hair into a locket. Meanwhile, a crazed Knock draws using his blood, assuring Count Orlok that he'll be sending the man as he requested while he'll guard his object of affection. The next morning, Ellen gives Thomas her locket before he sets off for Transylvania. After days of travel, Thomas arrives at a village where a group of gypsies laugh at him until the innkeeper sends them away. Thomas asks the innkeeper for a room, explaining that he's on the way to meet Count Orlok. Upon hearing the name, the innkeeper tells him to leave. However, Thomas offers to pay double for a room, so the innkeeper accepts him. Still, as the inn's attendant shows him his bed, she begs him not to go to Orlok's castle and advises him to pray. Late that night, Thomas wakes up to find villagers escorting a woman riding on a horse to the woods, praying for her as they walk. They stop upon finding a grave in the woods, which they dig up. They open the casket and call the creature inside a vampire before one of the men puts a stake through its heart. Thomas witnesses the corpse spit out blood, so he tries to stop the villagers, only to wake up back at the inn. However, his shoes are muddy as if he'd actually traversed the woods last night. Outside, he finds the village is empty. With even his horse gone, Thomas climbs the mountain to Orlok's castle alone. By nightfall, an unmanned carriage approaches him, so the exhausted Thomas accepts the ride and arrives at the castle at midnight. There, he finally meets Count Orlok, who insists on seeing the deed despite the late hour. Orlok guides his guests to the dining room, though his mysterious and aggressive demeanor scares Thomas. To hide his fear, Thomas starts a conversation about the villagers going to the woods at night. Orlok just explains that their country retains old superstitions before urging his frightened guests to eat. Thomas then grabs bread but cuts himself with the knife. Immediately, Orlok scolds him for being careless, though he adds that he can heal his wound. Suddenly, Thomas finds the Count's seat empty. Orlok appears from the other side and approaches him, while Thomas is frozen in fear. The next day, Ellen tells Anna how she's been feeling like her existence is at the whim of something terrible. Anna assumes that she's thinking of God, and Ellen realizes that her friend doesn't understand what she means. With that, she apologizes, excusing her ramblings as her missing her husband. Meanwhile, at the castle, Thomas wakes up alone in front of the fireplace. He searches for the Count, and as he does, he finds a mirror and discovers that he has a wound on his chest. That night, Orlok signs the paperwork. He then pushes the paper to Thomas, asking him to sign it as his solicitor. However, the document is written in an unfamiliar language, which Orlok claims to be his mother tongue. He then notices the man's locket, and Thomas confirms that it's from his wife. Orlok asks to borrow it, and after much hesitation, the man hands it over. Thomas then mentions that he has letters to send to his wife, but Orlok merely relishes the scent of Ellen's locket. He then urges Thomas to sign the document, and, to convince him to do so, he hands him a bag of coins. Thinking of his promise to provide for Ellen, Thomas signs the document. With that done, Orlok tells him to go to bed, but Thomas asks to leave since he's been having strange dreams. He fears that he's sick and must go home. Orlok suggests that traveling while sick is dangerous, so tells him to stay. The Count then leaves, and only then does Thomas realize that he still has his locket. Thomas reluctantly spends another night at the castle, but by dawn, he discovers a fresh bite mark on his chest. Scared, he runs out but finds himself trapped in the castle. Desperate, he breaks a door open, though it leads to an underground crypt. At the center is an ornate casket where Thomas finds the Count asleep. Convinced that his host is a monster, he recalls the villagers driving a stake into the corpse's chest. He grabs a pickaxe to do this, but Orlok wakes and throws his weapon back. He then rises from his casket, so Thomas runs while wolves chase him down. As Thomas locks himself back in his room, the vampire speaks through Ellen's locket, telling her that her husband is lost. From across the land, Ellen hears his voice. This causes her to sleepwalk while Orlok manipulates her husband's mind to let him and the wolves in. This allows the vampire to continue drinking his blood. The following night, Dr. Wilhelm checks on Ellen and notes that sleepwalking can sometimes be caused by too much blood. Friedrich mentions that Ellen has had these episodes before due to her troubled nerves. With this, Wilhelm advises Friedrich to tie Ellen to her bed if she gets too agitated. Just then, Ellen sings in her sleep about someone coming for her, so Wilhelm sedates her. In the morning, Thomas wakes up in the castle and is attacked by a wolf. Quickly, he climbs out the window but falls into the river below. Later that day, Ellen learns that Thomas is missing as he hasn't written or reported his location. Nock is also missing, making her suspect that he had something to do with Thomas's disappearance. Friedrich promises to find Nock and Thomas, though while Ellen is away, he complains to his wife about her condition. Anna asserts that the woman's situation isn't her fault, and her husband apologizes for being callous about it. He then checks on his unborn son, but their moment is interrupted when Ellen starts seizing nearby. Meanwhile, Nock is admitted to the hospital after going rabid in the market and killing and eating the sheep there. Wilhelm checks on the patient, who giggles as he prepares animal corpses for his lord's arrival. The doctor asks about this lord, so the man recounts how his master chose him to find what he desires. In turn, his lord will rain terror on all that had forsaken him. Suddenly, Nock attacks Wilhelm while an attendant tries desperately to save the doctor. At night, Ellen suffers another seizure in Friedrich's home. Once she's calmed down, Friedrich complains to Wilhelm about how this happens every night. The doctor then reveals that Nock is at his hospital, but he's become mad, so they can't ask him about Thomas. Still, Wilhelm noticed that both Nock and Ellen had mentioned that someone was coming. Wilhelm suggests seeking the help of his professor, von Franz, who happens to be in town. Friedrich asks why he hasn't recommended von Franz before, so Wilhelm explains that it's because his professor has become obsessed with alchemy and the occult. Meanwhile, a nun discovers Thomas unconscious by the river, so she takes him to the convent. There, the nuns and their priest pray over the man until Thomas regains consciousness, screaming Orlok's name. Hearing this, the abbess recounts how Orlok is a sorcerer who made a deal with the devil to preserve his life. With Orlok having brought the manor in their town, Thomas insists that he must protect his wife from him. The nuns assert that Orlok cannot leave Transylvania since he needs to return to where he was buried, but Thomas believes that the Count wants Ellen. As he fears, Orlok is contained in a crate filled with his grave's soil as he's being transported in a ship to Germany. Soon, Wilhelm takes Friedrich to von Franz, while Thomas steals a horse from the convent and leaves, despite the nuns' advice. Meanwhile, the crew manning the ship where Orlok is starts falling sick. Von Franz later checks on Ellen and asks her about her childhood afflictions. She tells him that she doesn't always remember what happens when she sleepwalks, but she sometimes dreamed about things she shouldn't have known, like when her mother would die before it happened. As she grew up, her experiences became nightmares. This, along with her seizures, made her feel alone. More so when after she had sleepwalked, her father found her in a field, unclothed. This convinced him that she was a sinner and threatened to send her to an asylum. All her troubles ended when she met Thomas, only for her afflictions to return since he went missing. That night, von Franz examines Ellen while she's in her trance. Seeing that her eyes don't react to light, he concludes that she's no longer present in her body. To prove this, he stabs her arm and Ellen doesn't react. Von Franz then tries to conjure Ellen back, asking her what she's seeing. She tells him that she sees the specter of death coming. She then starts seizing and her back arches in an inhuman way. Ellen's body writhes and tries to leave, but von Franz prays over her to extract the evil in her. Suddenly, she smiles as a demonic voice in her threatens to haunt their dreams before tormenting them in their waking hours. Ellen's own voice then cries for help, so von Franz pins her down. Once things settle down, the specialist concludes that she's possessed. Friedrich doubts this while Wilhelm suggests that Ellen might just be suffering delusions. Anna also thinks that this is caused by Ellen worrying about her husband. However, von Franz believes that Ellen is connected to a demonic being. Meanwhile, a storm rages over the sea as the ship crew disposes of their dead. To investigate what's causing the sickness, one of the men checks the hull and notices Orlok's crate, which is filled with rats. Suddenly, the vampire appears behind him and kills him. Elsewhere, Nock calls out for help in the hospital, so an attendant releases him from his straitjacket. The deranged patient uses this chance to bite the man before escaping the hospital, just as the ship approaches Germany. Ellen also senses something, so she runs out and finds an exhausted Thomas just before he falls off his horse. After regaining consciousness, Thomas is glad to see that Orlok hasn't found Ellen yet. However, he soon faints again just before the police arrive at the house. They escort Friedrich to the port where the ship, which he owns, had crashed, releasing a swarm of rats that spread the plague. During this, Nock has recovered his master and takes him to his new manor. There, Orlok discovers that Thomas is still alive, but instead of killing him, he decides that he might be useful. Nock assures his master that he can bring his bride to him, but Orlok reveals that their pact requires Ellen to willingly give herself to him. In the morning, Ellen sits by her husband's side and apologizes to Anna for causing trouble. Anna is just glad that Ellen is feeling better, believing that Thomas's disappearance was the cause of her affliction. However, Ellen asserts that Thomas saw something in his journey, so she wants to talk to von Franz about this demon. At the hospital, Wilhelm shows von Franz a corpse from the ship, which has a bite on the chest and is drained of blood. Given this, von Franz demands to see Nock, only to learn that he's escaped. That evening, Orlok uses his shadow to influence Thomas, who pushes his wife off the bed. During this, Anna feels a strange presence in the hallway. Ellen suddenly appears behind her and asks to sleep next to her for the night, which the woman agrees to. At von Franz's office, Friedrich is still unconvinced that something supernatural is happening. However, von Franz insists that for them to defeat this evil, they must first acknowledge that it exists. He then declares that the creature they're battling is the great vampire known as Nosferatu. Late at night, as Anna sleeps, Ellen gets up and opens the window, allowing Orlok to enter. Finally meeting face to face, Ellen berates the creature for haunting her, declaring that she loves Thomas, not him. The vampire claims that love is beneath her since she isn't fully human, given that she was able to wake him from his centuries of sleep. He asserts that they are destined, and to prove this, he reveals that Thomas signed a contract to nullify their marriage in exchange for a bag of gold. Refusing to believe this, Ellen accuses him of manipulating Thomas and herself, stressing that she was still a child when she accidentally woke him. She declares that she hates him, and this angers the vampire, so he pushes her. He decides to give her 3 days without his presence to prove that she needs him. On the third night, she must give herself to him. Otherwise, her husband will die. Ellen screams at this before waking from the nightmare. When she turns, she finds rats feeding on Anna. In the morning, the hospital is filled with patients sick with the plague. Anna is also driven mad by the sickness, so Ellen tries to convince Friedrich that a vampire caused all of these. The man still refuses to believe in the supernatural, though he blames Ellen and Thomas for their misfortune, so he asks them to leave their home. Meanwhile, von Franz discovers Nock's writings in his previous cell, convincing him that he's made a pact with the Nosferatu. With that, they break into his office where they find an ancient codex. Von Franz then visits Friedrich to discuss how to vanquish the vampire. He admits that he's not sure how to kill the creature, but they can be rid of him if they get him to sleep in his original grave. However, Friedrich berates the doctors for thinking of monsters instead of dealing with the plague. He decides to take his family away to escape, but von Franz warns that the vampire has drunk his wife's blood, so he'll return for her. Meanwhile, back at their own apartment, Ellen finally confesses to Thomas that she summoned Orlok. She admits that she prayed for sweet company, and Orlok responded to her, only for him to torment her in her dreams every night. This was until Thomas gave her the love she longed for. However, Orlok learned about their marriage, so he returned to take her away. Suddenly, Ellen's expression turns dark as she accuses her husband of breaking their marriage for gold. She then starts seizing and ripping her dress, screeching in agony until Thomas moves to fetch a doctor. Ellen suddenly snaps out of her possession and begs her husband not to leave. She embraces him, but in a cold voice, she declares that Thomas can never please her as Orlok could. Rage then takes over Thomas, so he carries her to the couch and proves his passion, all while Ellen dares Orlok to see their love. However, Thomas suddenly sees a vision of a bloodied Ellen, so he pulls away while his wife convulses. He then takes her into his arms to comfort her, and Ellen weeps. She worries that Orlok will kill them if she doesn't surrender, so Thomas promises to vanquish the creature. Meanwhile, Von Franz discovers from Nock's codex that the creature can be killed through a maiden sacrifice. At the Hardings' home, Orlok casts a spell to keep Friedrich from waking as his daughters scream for help. Because of this, Anna runs to the girls alone and finds the vampire attacking them before going after her. The following day, Friedrich mourns for his family as they're taken to their graves. When he sees Ellen there, he accuses her of bringing the plague to his family. Thomas defends his wife and shows his friend his bite mark, asserting that the monster is real. This finally convinces him that the monster might be real, so he joins the group as the doctors wonder why Thomas recovered from being bitten. He recounts that the nuns nursed him back to health with prayer, but he thinks he's still not free from Orlok's spell. With Thomas's help, they conclude that Orlok keeps his casket in Grunewald Manor, so they plot to destroy him tonight. Ellen insists on joining them, but Thomas wants her away from danger. Von Franz advises her to stay at Friedrich's home while they destroy Orlok's casket so he cannot hide from the sun. Once he's back to being a corpse, Thomas will drive a stake through his heart. Knowing that something is amiss, Ellen volunteers to walk von Franz to his home to speak to him privately. She tells him that she needs to be the one to kill the vampire, and von Franz acknowledges that she was born with a supernatural connection to it. He then hints that he'll keep her husband away tonight, so she must encourage him on this false hunt. Back in their home, Ellen begs her husband not to return to her until he kills Orlok. Thomas promises, and Ellen professes her love for him, sealing it with a kiss. He then leaves, and Ellen whispers her final goodbye. Thomas meets with the rest at the Harding home but finds that Friedrich has left. Worried, he insists on finding him before their hunt, so they set off to the graveyard. As his friend feared, a grieving Friedrich visits his family's graves. He blames himself for sleeping through their screams, so to never sleep again, he enjoys his wife's body one last time. Thomas and the doctors soon discover him dead after getting infected through Anna's body. Unable to take any more grief, Thomas asserts that they must kill Orlok tonight. With that, he, Wilhelm, and von Franz head to Grunewald Manor while Ellen lures Orlok to her. The men reach the casket, and Thomas immediately drives the stake inside upon opening it. However, instead of Orlok, Nock is inside. In his dying breath, the man mourns that his master never gave him immortality since he only cared about his bride. Hearing this, Thomas realizes that Orlok is heading to Ellen, but von Franz insists that they need to destroy the vampire's home before the sun rises. He insists that Orlok cannot resist Ellen's blood, so this is their only chance to destroy him. This leads Thomas and Wilhelm to realize that von Franz knew Orlok wouldn't be here tonight. They call him out for using Ellen as bait before running to save her while von Franz burns the casket in the manor. During this, Orlok visits Ellen and asks if she accepts him. She says yes, so the vampire kisses his bride. She then leads him to her bed, allowing the monster to satisfy himself with her blood and body. As the sun rises, Thomas races to save his wife. Orlok notices the sun from Ellen's window, but even in her weakened form, she urges him to drink more of her blood. Unable to resist, he does as she commands, allowing the light to reach the vampire. The sun starts to burn him, and Ellen keeps him in place as he perishes. Thomas and Wilhelm arrive just as Orlok dies, but Ellen has lost too much blood. Her husband holds her hand just before she dies as well, leaving Thomas alone.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.